Billy Goldenberg, it's so nice to see you here in Melbourne. You have a long history of composing, although a brief one with Broadway.
Hmm.
I'm just looking through your credits for all the TV work you've done as well. And you're out here with Bea Arthur. First of all, how did you and Bea come to
How
meet
did
each
we
other?
meet? Well, actually, all right, I have to go back to a musical since we are talking a lot about that. Back in 1978, Marilyn Allen Bergman, my lyricist, and myself wrote a musical called Ballroom, and it had been based on a television show we had done called Queen of the Stardust Ballroom with Maureen Stapleton. And Michael Bennett came along and wanted it to be his first show after Chorus Line. So we opened it December of 1978. But Michael had a very different conception of the show, and show was not a hit. We were just a miserable flop, as a matter of fact, which was terrible because it was my first Broadway show, and I was very upset by it. But in any case, we always had plans of rewriting, which we have done, as a matter of fact. We have a whole new version now, which may be going to London next year with Cheetah Rivera. And but the thing is, in the meantime, the songs survived, especially a couple of them. One in particular called 50%, which a lot of the cabaret singers were doing, and a couple of people made records of it. I mean, even Alan Reddy made a record of it a couple of years ago, which was a real surprise, a wonderful record. Anyway, this is a little backstory, but in any case, there was an ACLU benefit in 1981 in Los Angeles at the Dorothy Chandler Music Pavilion, and the idea of the benefit was to honor Marilyn Allen Bergman. And the hostess of the evening was Barbara Streisand. And Marilyn Allen have worked with many, many different composers. And the idea of the evening was to have all of those composers come and conduct an orchestra or play the piano and perform the works that they had written with Marilyn and Allen. It was a wonderful evening, and really the most recent musical Marilyn Allen had written was Queen of the Stardust Ballroom with me. And actually, I think they only had one other musical that they had written called Something More years before that. But anyway, they said they had an idea that Bea Arthur might be able to perform some of the songs from that show. So we had three songs, one called Who Gave You Permission, another one was 50%, and there was a song called A Terrific Band and a Real Nice Crowd. I'd never met Bea before. And so we rehearsed together, and she was absolutely wonderful, but she gave the song something that they never had before. She gave them subtext. There was such meaning to everything, because she's a consummate actress, and as a matter of fact, when you see the show, you'll understand that she sings 17 songs in our show, and they're all invested with a lot of substance. And I do love that, because I always missed it somehow in all the versions we did of our show. But anyway, Bea and I became very good friends, and she killed everybody. As a matter of fact, when she walked off the stage, Barbara Streisand grabbed me, and she said, "I don't understand why did 50% didn't sound that good in the show." You know, I said, "Well, you have a lady who understands it." She says, "Yeah, I guess that does matter." She says, "Okay," so we went off, and ever since then we've been friends. Anyway, Barbara Streisand said when we walked off the stage of the ACLU benefit that evening, she said, "I don't understand why 50% didn't sound that way, and the show was so wonderful, you know. And I said, well, it's Bea Arthur singing, you know. I mean, and she knows what this is about. And Barbara said, yes, I guess so, you know. So anyway, B didn't hear that. And I tell her that, and she still doesn't believe it. She says, you're making it up. I said, no, I'm not making it up. I said, she honestly said that. So that was the beginning of a long relationship between us. And we both had, I guess, two major interests. One was the music. She loved singing old songs, new songs. She's she's hip. I mean, she knows every song that's going on now, you know. I mean, she can relate to all kinds of music. And she's a great fan of Stevie Wonder and Billy Joel and all of that. And plus, you know, the greats, the Gershwins, the musical comedy people. And we had a lot of nice evenings with friends and also by ourselves, you know, where we would just play and sing. And then it kind of got out, so we were asked to do a great many benefits. And most of them were AIDS benefits in those days because it was, you know, 81, which was when the AIDS thing really broke out. And there were many, many benefits. But we were always part of the program. We were, you know, maybe two of, I don't know, 15, 20 people who would come on and do various things.
Yeah.
The other thing that we always were interested in was food. And this was...
Hence the lamb roast.
That's it, yeah. It was no joke, though, you know. I mean, whenever we would get together, she said, where are we eating? And I said, well, I'll check it out. And it's a, you know, her tastes are very eclectic, as mine are, and so we would search out restaurants in the Los Angeles area. We would travel miles to go anywhere. You know, if there was an interesting Sri Lankan restaurant somewhere, we would go there, you know, and just show up. And nobody else would do that, you know. I mean, nobody wanted to go out of Los Angeles to restaurants, but we just traveled for miles and miles. And so we discovered some really good places, a terrific Chinese community out there called Monterey Park, which is still the best Chinese food in Los Angeles. And so food was a very important part of our relationship. And she cooked a lot. One of the things she cooked a lot was the lamb. It's really delicious. It's kind of a barbecue flavor, but she got the recipe from Julia Child. Plus, she added some stuff, and it was wonderful. And I used to cook for her, and, you know, we had this thing in common, and we always shared recipes and all of that. So we had songs and food, you know, and very little else in between. We didn't have any dialogue for what we were doing. I mean, she would say a funny joke from time to time during these benefits, but we didn't have a show or anything like that. We just had hundreds of songs that we did. And then we got a call from Barry Brown, who had organized a lot of AIDS benefits, and he said they were doing something in Palm Springs, and he wanted her to come down and sing. So we accepted. Then he called back and he said, but it's only you. And she said, well, how long do you want? And he said, oh, I guess about 30 minutes. And she says, but we don't have any lines. I mean, we have maybe a joke or two, but I mean, we need filler. We need something, you know, to do, you know, besides. We have lots of songs, but we can't just do a concert. And so Barry said, well, you'll find something outrageous, you know, and I'll send you a few writers. Well, the writers showed up from time to time. Sometimes they wouldn't. I never, and they wouldn't call, they just came and they were a little afraid because they had to do it so quickly. Nobody really came up with anything. So finally, B said to me, "You're going to get sick." I said, "I always get sick." I said, "This is terrible because, I'll be walking along the street. People will come up to me and say, 'Are you feeling better? We hear you're so frail.'" I said, "No, she keeps saying that. I am not frail. I'm not sick." So I said to B, "You get sick this time." She said, "I cannot get sick. I am the star." And I said, "Well, we might use this as we'll just use it as an experiment to find out if we indeed have a show or not. I have an idea. We've known each other over 20 years, and I know every funny story you've ever told. And we've had a lot of very interesting experiences together. We spent a lot of time together. We became very good friends. I said, I think what we might find is something more organic than just having a writer come in and say a funny thing happened to me walking across the street this morning. So anyway, I turned on a tape recorder and just made her talk into it and reminded her of a few experiences and jokes and so forth. Then we got a friend of ours to take it all down, and so we could look at it. And each day we would look at it and we would edit and fix and add and subtract but it came out very honest, I mean, it all had to do with experiences that we had had with one another, or she had had with people she had worked with. So there's nothing in the show that's not real. I mean, it's all very honest, and it's very funny. So we did the benefit, and 30 minutes turned into 45 because the audience wouldn't let her go. So when we returned from that evening, we started looking at each other and saying, maybe we do have something. People have told us to do a one-woman show, but we just were afraid of it because we had no writing and we didn't know what to do. So we continued this process of finding experiences that we could share, things about people she worked with, and God knows she worked with so many. I mean, the show only covers a small amount of the people that she worked with. Then we fit the music in between, and we came up with an hour-and-a-half show. We went to the Westport Country Playhouse, where our friend Donald Sadler had wanted us to try out the show. So we went up there and we tried it out, and it was very rough. They loved the show. She got wonderful reaction. And,
you get great audiences there, too.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful. And Donald, being such a good friend, he directed it for us. And he did the lighting, and he's always been a part of this. He's a wonderful man. They've known each other for years, and all of us have really become very, very close friends. So anyway, that was the beginning of it. And then they talked about possibly doing it at the Theatre de Lys downtown, where she did Three Penny Opera to begin with. Because Lucille Lortel owned the Westport Country Playhouse. Lucille had just died. But they continued, in Lucille's memory, and Lucille also owned the Theatre de Lys, which now I believe they call the Lucille Lortel Theatre.
Yes.
So they were thinking of doing it down there, but that went by the wayside, and nobody could quite get it together. But a little time passed, and I had a conversation with Charles Randolph Wright, who had helped us with the show at the very beginning. He had a lot of ideas and was very helpful. He's a wonderful director. He has a show now called Blue, which they're doing in Pasadena, California, and in various other places. And he's a very up-and-coming writer and director. But in any case, Charles said, why don't you meet my friend Darryl Roth? And Darrell had really produced some good things in New York. Wit and How I Learned to Drive, The Tale of the Allergist's Wife, Proof. I mean, just one wonderful thing after another. So we went up to meet Darrell, and we liked her a lot. And Darrell said, "Why don't we do a tour first? We'll do an 8-month tour, and in a way, it will be your out-of-town tryout." So we went to every little whistle stop in the United States, and it was rough, you know. The performances were fun,
Yeah.
but the traveling was awful.
I was going to say, how did you stand up to all the traveling?
Well, it was, I don't know how she did. It was hard enough for me, you know. But I mean, there were times that we were traveling on buses, and she's a tall woman, you know, and she was sleeping on berths that were too small for her. But she was a trooper, and, you know, she's a very professional lady. Uh, Never complained. The only thing she ever complained about was if the food wasn't particularly good in the town, you know, where we were. And it was always very difficult because we would finish the show at 9:30. Then there was the problem in a small town finding a restaurant that
After
would
the
be
show.
open other than Denny's, and she didn't want to do that. So, in a couple of cases, we had them stay open, and or the company manager would cater food, and he would do an exhaustive search through the town. But you know, when we were in the South, she loved barbecue, so we would go all around and look for barbecue. And we were in Florida a lot, and they had it there, you know. So and fried green tomatoes and all that kind of stuff, you know, which she adores. Plus, when we could get it, Oriental food, Japanese, was always top of the list if it was good.
Had you ever
But
toured any of those areas before in your life? Or was this all a new experience for you, too?
pretty much new because my work has generally been in one place. I mean, especially in Hollywood, where I had to work a lot just writing scores. I just worked in my little studio. And even when I worked on Broadway and I worked on dance music, yeah, the touring was limited. We would try the show out in maybe 2 places, Boston and Philadelphia. Nothing like this, though. I mean, we would sometimes perform the show for a week, sometimes for 3 days, you know. Then we would either get on a bus or a train or a plane or whatever.
Now, you grew up in Brooklyn. Or you were
Well,
born in Brooklyn.
I
Did you grow up in
was
New York?
I was born in Brooklyn, but that was only Unity Hospital in Williamsburg. And then afterwards, we moved to a section called Long Island City, which was right across the Queensboro Bridge
Sure.
from Manhattan.
Yeah, because your dad taught percussion at Juilliard, didn't he?
Juilliard, and he also played at the radio station WOR. In those days, each radio station had its own symphony orchestra, and we're talking about the 40s. And I used to go down every Sunday, and I would listen to wonderful concerts. I mean, they were the equivalent of the NBC Symphony. But we would get Leopold Stokowski, Emerson Buckley, all kinds of really incredible conductors. Plus, then they would have these kind of pop concerts, and we would get wonderful singers.
And
Yes.
the personalities from WOR, did you get to know them as well then through
Oh,
I mean, there were people like
yes.
Arlene Francis and Martin Gable and John Gamble and
Well,
Dorothy Kilgallen.
And The Shadow. I knew The Shadow.
Whoa, can I touch you?
Cranston. I knew him because that was the station that did it. So while the orchestra was rehearsing, I used to, you know, I don't know, 9, 10 years old, and I used to wander through the studios, and I saw the little creaking door, you know, that was there, and they were all props and everything, and spend some time with Lamont Cranston and all of these people. But I do want to tell you one funny story.
Okay.
We were on Broadway, and one night, Bea said, "You'll never guess who's coming to the show, and she wants to come up and see me." I said, "Oh, who's that?" And she said, "Gay Armin." I said, "Oh, my God." Well, Gay Armin was my favorite singer when I was a little boy, and she used to appear at these concerts at WOR and sing wonderful songs. Now, I had remembered that she sang a song called "Here I'll Stay," which was my favorite song at the time. And, well, today, Kay is well on. I don't know exactly how old, 70s or 80s and so forth, but she came backstage, and I couldn't wait to meet her. And, she looked terrific and so forth, and she talked to Bea and she talked to me and she said how much she loved the show. I said, "I cannot tell you what a thrill it is. I mean, when I was a little boy, I used to come to WOR and listen to you all the time." And she said, "Oh, yes, I seem to remember a little boy and everything." I said, well, I was the one. I just loved her. And your version of "Here I'll Stay" was so wonderful. She says, "I never sang Here I'll Stay." I said, "I'm sure you sang Here I'll Stay. I mean, it was such a wonderful song." And she said, "No, I didn't." I said, "Well, I went out and got a record, and on the other side of the record was Thinking of You." She says, "I don't even know that." So Bea is taking off her makeup, and she turns to me. I don't know if we can say this on the radio.
Yes.
Um,
This is Australia. We say anything.
we say anything. So Bea looked at me and very loudly said, "You feel like a horse's ass, don't you, Billy?" Which was actually the best thing she could have said because it immediately broke the tension. However, Kay Armin didn't laugh. It was not at all interesting to her, and she left soon afterwards. Anyway.
Did you ever find out what song it was that she sang?
Well, we did a lot of research on the internet,
Yeah.
and we found those songs, but there were never any versions that she sang, so maybe I was having a touch of Alzheimer's. I don't know. I have no idea. But anyway, I do apologize to the lady if she does ever hear this. And God, it was an awkward moment. But Bea took care of it, as she usually does, But we're very outrageous with each other. I mean, a lot of people don't understand it because they all sound like terrible insults, but we love each other a lot, and we're really good friends, and we're not afraid to say anything, no matter how terrible it is. And everybody kind of backs off. Not everyone. I mean, those who know us well, but very often, Bea is one of the kindest ladies I know. There's no question. And she would never do anything to hurt anybody. She's a very unusual star because she's not, there's no vitriol in Bea, but she loves to be outrageous and to say the unexpected.
But she's not outrageous just to be outrageous. I mean, she's honest outrageous. She says what's on her mind, and you know that when she says something, she's not bullshitting you.
Absolutely. And she also knows if you are bullshitting her. I mean,
but that's one of the things
you
probably
can't
that
do it.
made her roles on television so unique too. I mean, when she did Maud and even in the Golden Girls as well,
Yes.
because people knew that while she was a great actor, that it was her. I mean, this is the lady.
Yes. She liked doing those shows, I think, a lot because she could really express herself. Norman Lear, who was actually her father figure in a way, actually was that kind of writer and producer where, again, Norman wasn't afraid to do anything, and he took full advantage of Bea, she was. As a matter of fact, when we first sang all of the songs for him in Bea's house, he was a wreck. I mean, he was just crying, I can't tell you, because she was like his child. And that was kind of the relationship. He is so proud of her, and he's been to see the show and just loves it, and it's really nice to see, the relationship between them, I didn't see many of these kinds of producer, actor, actress relationships when I was in Hollywood. They were quite the opposite. But those two are really joined at the hip.
Now, you say you played the oboe. We were sharing some personal
Yeah,
information there.
probably not as good as you do.
Thanks. I don't know anymore. But had you played the piano before you played the oboe?
Oh, yes. I actually, my parents tried to teach me their instruments. My father tried to teach me the drums, and I hated that. And then my mother, who played violin, tried to teach me that. I wasn't much good at that. But I was like 4 years old when they were doing that. And then at 5, I was listening to the radio and bouncing up and down, and I heard somebody playing the piano. And I said, that's what I want to study. Well, my father didn't have enough money to buy a piano, so he got one of these cardboard pianos with a keyboard on it so that I knew where the notes were. And then once a week, I would go 2 blocks away to Mrs. Marchese, who had a real piano, and I would learn, and then I gave my first concert at 5 and a half. And the oboe thing came when I went to high school because I wanted to be in the band, but there was no place for a piano player in the band. Yeah. And so
Which high school did you go to?
Well, actually, 2. The first high school I went to was Music and Art High School in New York City, which was quite wonderful. But I was only there for a semester because we moved. We moved from Long Island City out to Bayside, Long Island, which was a big trip from the city. So my father said it would be better if you went to a high school nearby here, then you don't have to get up so early in the morning and all. So anyway, I was a little crestfallen because I did love Music and Art High School, and I had learned the oboe there from a wonderful man by the name of Abraham Klotzman. So he taught us to make our own reeds, and, I mean, it was a terribly frustrating instrument at times, especially on cold days.
Yes.
When you couldn't get anything but a squeak out of the reed, I went on to Bayside High School, and there was this wonderful, statuesque man, Alfred Lushner, who conducted the band, and he didn't have an oboe player in the band. So I went and I played oboe, not awfully well, but every year he used to give 3 nights of music. And all the parents showed up and so forth, and so it was my debut playing the oboe, and I remember we played the overture from the Fledermaus, which has a substantial oboe solo at the beginning of it, and it's like the whole band just comes to a crashing halt, and there's nothing but the oboe playing, with a little bit of accompaniment. Well, I made a mess of it. I mean, it was the worst thing. And I felt particularly bad because my father, mother, and sister were in the audience, and there are these 2 genius musicians, and I am just making a fool of myself with this thing, So anyway, Mr. Lushner gave me a couple of dirty looks, and then we went on to the overture of Die Fledermaus, which, thank God, was, the band. And then we drove home, and I remember my father and mother saying nothing, absolutely nothing. And then my sister, who was 3 years younger to me, she said, "You were really lousy today." So it kind of reminded me of a bee in a horse's ass, because my sister's the same. And what's interesting is my sister and Bea have become terribly close friends because my sister, unfortunately, is in a sanitarium now because of several head injuries she had because of some bad falls. But when Bea comes to New York, she always goes out and visits Lucille, and they have a wonderful time together.
Did your sister play an instrument as well?
Yes, my sister was, she wasn't the musician that she wanted to be, but she felt that since everybody else in the family was playing an instrument, she should play one. So she learned to play the French horn. And she wasn't bad, actually, and she loved it. She really, really loved it. She never went on with it, but at least she knew that she could be in the band, and it was kind of fun, for her, and it was a thing she looked forward to mostly.
So when did you start writing?
Very early, very early. When I was 5, I wrote my first piece, which was an arrangement of Little Brown Jug. And then after that, I had a wonderful aunt who used to take me to Broadway shows. And she took me to One Touch of Venus with Mary Martin, and which had a score by Kurt Weill and was choreographed by Agnes DeMille. And I was smitten. I just thought that's the greatest thing in the world. And then we went to see Oklahoma and every single Rodgers and Hammerstein show that was on Broadway. And I thought, that's what I want to be. I want to be Richard Rodgers. So I would come home and I would write little tunes that sounded exactly like Richard Rodgers. Until many years later, when I went to Columbia University and I wrote for the varsity show, one of the guys who was running things came to me and he said, "Well, we love your tunes.
They sound like Richard Rodgers."
Yes, but you think you could write something else besides a Richard Rodgers tune, And I said, "Well, there are no other tunes. And he said, "Oh, come on." And what was interesting is Richard Rodgers used to go to Columbia University.
And he wrote for the varsity
shows. And he
shows.
wrote for the varsity shows. So he came to one of the varsity shows, and I knew there were a couple of songs in there which were absolutely Richard Rodgers songs. But I started to write a little bit of other stuff. And then West Side Story came out. And, well, that just changed everything, and I thought, oh, there is another way of writing music, isn't there? And so then I wrote Leonard Bernstein music for a little while, but then I found my own style, and I really intended to write musical comedy, but the business changed. I wrote a lot of dance music for a lot of Broadway shows. And then Hair came, and Hair changed everything. A lot of us, Johnny Gander, David Shire, Marvin Hamlish, we were all devastated because it wasn't the kind of music we rewrote, And, well, in those days, nobody knew what rock really, well, certainly teenagers knew what rock was, but for us, the 50s was not Elvis Presley and Grease and, what later was Grease, and those kinds of songs. I didn't know any of that music. All I knew was Lerner and Loewe's My Fair Lady and Leonard Bernstein's West Side Story.
And Frank Lesser.
And Frank Lesser, who became my mentor, actually. I worked on Green Willow, and Frank signed me up as a composer, and we became great friends. I have lots of Frank Lesser stories, actually.
Oh, do tell, do tell.
But I don't know, do you have time for
I've got
all
time.
Of that?
I don't know if you have time.
Oh, I have plenty of time. No, Frank was a very special man, and Green Willow starred Tony Perkins and who else was Pert Kelton.
Yes. Was Joe Sullivan in that one too?
No, Joe. Actually, Joe had just married Frank. There was a terrible thing that the people used to say. I remember Lynn Lesser and Frank really didn't get along too well, But when Frank was doing Most Happy Fella Before, he married Joe Sullivan. He was dealing with Lynn Lesser, who had something to do with the production. But they had been married for a while, and apparently things were not going too well. Anyway, they divorced, and Frank and Joe married. And, I still see Joe, who looks wonderful, really wonderful. But they used to call Lynn the evil of two lessers. Especially Frank, who mentioned her as that. Uh, Unfortunately, I never met Lynn. I might have liked Lynn. I have no idea. But Frank was an amazing man. He wrote the most beautiful melodies, and yet he was not a great pianist. And he found it very difficult writing and reading music. Uh, he was not a hummer. He could bat out melodies on the piano and play a few chords. So he asked me to come and work with him a bit. He had somebody else working with him though at the time before I came in to be rehearsal pianist on Green Willow, and that was a man by the name of Buddy Strauss. And Charles Strauss, as you know him. Yeah. So anyway, Buddy said to me, every night what would happen is Buddy and Frank and I would be kind of working on the music for Green Willow at the piano, and Frank would say, well, let's see if we can change that chord and so forth. And we would work out a few chords and everything, the three of us, and we always had a good time. And Frank was on the phone with the stock exchange because he was a very good businessman. And and Buddy said to me, he said, listen, he said, you may have to take over my job here. I said, why? And he said, well, there's a musical that I've written, and I'm not sure that we're going to get it on, but I said, he said that Ed Padula said that if he could raise the money, that we would produce this musical. It was called something else then. I forget what it was, but I do remember one evening, Frank was not there, but Buddy and I were there. We were just taking a break, and the phone rang, and it was Ed Padula, and Buddy had a big smile on his face, and he put down the thing. He says, well, I'm going to do my first musical. They raised the money. Well, that became Bye Bye Birdie. And so anyway, I was delighted for him. I was also delighted for me because I got the job of not only helping Frank, but also writing the dance music for Green Willow, which I got no credit for because Frank never gave any credit to any other composers. However, he particularly liked what I did on this, which, at first was an arrangement of his melodies, but Joe Layton, the choreographer, wanted me to write my own melodies. So I went to Frank. I said, Frank, I don't know why. He said, Frank. So Frank said, Billy, you could do whatever you want. He said, but it's the tradition. I just can't give you credit. And I didn't care. I mean, I was, I don't know, 23 years old or something. And so I said, I really don't get just the idea of doing it. And Don Walker was the orchestrator. And it was thrilling, And so I wrote a lot of dance music. And Frank loved it. And the show opened. The show was not a huge success, but I think there was some beautiful music in it. And the first night of the show, Frank took me downstairs in the Alvin Theater, which now is the Neil Simon Theater on 52nd Street. And he said to me, I'd like to give you something. And he stuck something in my pocket, and I took it out, and I said, Frank, what is this? And he said, this is a check for $1,000. I said, what do you give me $1,000 for? He said, go marry a Gentile girl. I said, Frank, what do you do? He said, listen, he said, you did all this wonderful music, and you can't know how ashamed I am for not giving you credit on it, and I never want you or hear of you doing something else without credit. And secondly, I want to publish your music. Can I do that? I said, I don't have any choice about, of course, that, you know. And every single day, Frank called me up and he said, what are you writing? You know, and so he really made me write. I mean, he was quite a wonderful man. I was very sad when he died. He smoked too much. Yeah. He was 58, and he died the same age my father did. But it was smoking, and it was cancer, and so Joe was left there with the kids, and but Joe is still functioning and is doing a lot of benefits, and her daughter Emily is a very good performer now. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So was it Lynn Lesser's idea that people didn't get credit for helping Frank out?
I don't know whose idea it was. I really don't know. It was a peculiar thing because Frank wasn't that kind of man. You know, he was not a selfish man. I have no idea where that all started, but the point is, every show he did was so, I don't know, it was organic. Certainly, Most Happy Fellow was almost like an opera, you know. So, I mean, there was no dance music in it to speak of. And a lot of the shows he had done before that, even, there weren't. But even in How to Succeed, which he did after Green Willow, nobody else got any credit for it. But I don't know what the process was. But after that, I always did get credit, and he always made sure of that. And in a couple of cases where I was dealing with producers who had a question about it, Frank said, you just put me on the phone with him, I'll take care of it, you know. And he did. He was my protector, you know, so.
Tom Jones in 110 in the Shade.
Mm-hmm.
Great musical. Wonderful musical.
It's rather interesting. The reason I got that was because I developed a relationship with Agnes DeMille. And we had done something at Bucks County Playhouse called The Mirror Under the Eagle in 1960. And right after that, I did an evening with Mike Nichols and Elaine May because Alexander Cohen, the producer of that, had heard my work there. But then later on, Agnes called me up and told me about 110 in the Shade, and she wanted to do that with me. So I went. I loved the music, and I did the show. It was produced by David Merrick, who was very tough. Really tough. And Agnes and David did not get along at all. So
who did get along with David?
Well, actually, I got along with David, you know, which was strange. I mean, David always used to call me up and say, come see me. And I never knew what it was about, but I would go in and I would really have nice times with him. And I rather liked him. And he was doing a little research on the show, asking me little stories about. And he would twirl his mustache. You know, he was the arch villain, but he was a good theatrical producer and very interested in the show. And I rather liked him. He was an eccentric, strange man, but I did have a good time with him. And a few other people, Jack Schliskel worked for him, and there was a wonderful man that worked for him that then became a Hollywood producer afterwards. And I may remember it afterwards. But anyway, David Merrick did a terrible thing to Agnes, though, and I'm sure it was all personal. He just eliminated every dance from the show, and some of them were wonderful dancers. But he liked eliminating anything he could of Agnes's. And I remember, well, after a while, Agnes and I had nothing to do, you know, because there was no dance music to be written. And so when we were out of town in Boston, the last dance was removed, which was the picnic number, which was really a wrench to Agnes because she loved picnic numbers and anything Americana, you know. So David came out in the lobby twirled his mustache a little bit, and said to Agnes, "Well, I've eliminated the picnic number. What do you think of that?" And she said, "Mr. Merrick, you think you're horrible, don't you?" And David said, "I am horrible." And she says, "No, you're not. My Uncle Cecil was the most horrible man in the world, and you don't hold a candle to that." So we left, and she took me to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, and we went to see many of her lady friends who were poets. I mean, she was a Renaissance lady, and her life was a lot more than dance. She was a writer, she was a poet, she was everything, and we had a lot of fun together. I mean, even later on when she had her stroke, because she originally came from Hollywood, and even when she went through a series of strokes, I mean, she taught herself to speak again and all of it. She came out to Hollywood, and she would always visit me, and we would go up onto Mulholland Drive, and she would ask me to go out and gather wild mustard. And I said, "Well, I don't know what wild mustard." She says, "All you musicians are stupid. You don't know what wild mustard. That yellow stuff." So I would go running into the fields and gathering all of these huge bunches of yellow flowers, and then I'd bring them back to the car. She couldn't walk at that time, but she had a kind of crutches at the beginning, then a cane after that. She always stayed at the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles, and then we went, and we would go to lunch, and then I would set up the flowers there, and but that went on for several years before she died, but she was quite an extraordinary lady. But I never did another Broadway show with her. She wanted me to, one called Quamina, which she did.
Yes, Sally Ann House was in that one.
Yes, but Richard Adler was a very difficult man, and I didn't like him, and I told her I didn't think I could work with him, and she said, "That's just fine, don't worry about it." She never held anything against me because of that. We continued to be friends, and then shortly after that, I went to Hollywood, and then, of course, she visited me there, and then she died, which was very upsetting to me. They honored her at the Kennedy honors several times. She told me one rather funny story, because if you remember, during the Reagan administration, they took away the endowment for the arts, which she was a great fan of. And she gave it to him. She sat right next to him and said, "How could you possibly take away the endowment of the arts?" And he said, "What?" And she shouted again, and he said, "I'm sorry, you're talking to my bad ear." So she talked into the other ear, and she said, "Well, how could you take away the endowment of the arts?" He said, "Did I take away the endowment for the arts? I certainly wouldn't do a thing like that." And he said, "Whoever advised me to do it must have been talking to my bad ear." But anyway, later on, she told that story a lot. And later on, she was honored again. She loved Jimmy Carter. I mean, she was wild about Jimmy Carter. And they developed a long relationship, I know, and wrote to one another. He was a writer, too, and he's written many wonderful books, and their philosophies were very similar. She liked him. He was a genuine intellectual, probably one of the few, with the exception of later on Bill Clinton. But we had really not had a president, I think, with the kind of credentials that Mr. Carter and Clinton had, I still think I'm a very big Bill Clinton supporter, and I'm a little sad about it, because he's, I don't know, I just don't think he's heard enough, but he'll surface, somewhere along the line. He's in Harlem now, in the middle of the black section, and he's got great support among the black population in New York, and he's been seen walking around an awful lot there. He's got huge offices up there, which is absolutely unheard of,
It was a terrific move, especially considering the conflict of having the offices in Midtown Manhattan that he was going to have.
Absolutely.
But it was really a wonderful move. I mean, I'm still waiting to see. Well, Jimmy Carter tried to help revive the Bronx with some of his building programs.
Of course.
But something that I still dream of is the day that there's a politician that realizes the value of the land in the Bronx, and they rebuild the Bronx again, because it's just too valuable not to have its resurgence and have its day again.
In a way, it's surprising that Giuliani didn't, but he had his hands full, certainly, in the last couple of years. And I think if anybody was going to do it, he might have. I have no idea who's on the horizon. I think that certainly a lot has to be done there now. It's the one borough. I mean, they're fixing up Brooklyn and Manhattan. Harlem they're fixing up.
Yeah.
Harlem is a very desirable place to live now. And also other areas of Manhattan that used to be very dangerous. My section, I live in what used to be called Al's Kitchen, and today it's very gentrified. There are high-rise buildings and restaurants and art galleries and theaters and all kinds of things. It's a completely different kind of section. So the Bronx really does deserve it. But I was happy when the Nobel Peace Prize was given to Carter. I mean, nobody deserved it more.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. So, you were doing all this work in New York, and you were writing dance arrangements for musicals. What took you out to Hollywood?
Hair.
It just drove you away.
Oh, yes.
Did you have anything lined up when you went to Hollywood, or did you just go and then knock on studio doors?
What happened was I did a musical in New York that was based on Ray Bradbury's novel Dandelion Wine. And Richard Rodgers had a program at Lincoln Center in one of the smaller theaters, which in those days was called the Forum. Now it's called, oh my goodness.
The Mitzi Newhouse.
The Mitzi Newhouse, exactly. But it's a smaller theater, and we performed 5 performances of this work and cleaned it up a little bit, and it was a lot of fun. But I was broke afterwards, had no money, and then I got a call from an old friend, Michael Bennett. And Michael Bennett asked me if I wanted to do the dance music for Henry Sweet Henry.
Yeah.
So I had no money. I said, I guess I better, So I went, and I hated it after doing my own musical, plus the fact I didn't particularly like the music in it, and I was very unhappy. But
so this was this after Ballroom?
Oh, no.
Well, Ballroom hadn't happened yet.
This was,
this was after Dandelion Wine.
Right.
Okay.
It would have to be probably 66, somewhere in there. And anyway, Don Amici was the star of it, I remember.
That's right.
Yeah. And
played the Palace.
That's right. And Alice Playton and gosh, I don't remember a lot of the other. But George Roy Hill was the director, and Michael Bennett was the choreographer. It was before Michael made any kind of big splash, but it was his first Broadway show. And I wrote the dance music, and usually what happened is after rehearsals were finished in New York, you would go to an out-of-town tryout. So they were about to go to Philadelphia, but I had done my work, and I went to Michael and I said, well, I guess I'll get to work on the orchestrations. And he said, no, you can't do the orchestrations. I said, what do you mean I can't do the orchestration? He said, we have an orchestrator. I said, Michael, you know what happens. I said, you give your work to an orchestrator, it all comes out different. And he said, well, I don't know if it's legal for you to do, or I suppose, of course it's legal for me to do. I'm saving him a lot of work. And we had a very good orchestrator, Eddie Sauter, wonderful. but I wanted to do it on the basis of I wanted to maintain the music and make it palatable for the dancers, because dancers always complain after they hear it played on the piano and then they hear the orchestra. They say, we can't dance to that,
Yeah.
it's all different. So I didn't want that to happen. And then we went to the producer, Norman Twain. He wouldn't let me do it either. So I went to Michael and I said, I quit. So Michael said, oh no, what am I going to do? I said, well, first of all, you have all the music and it will be orchestrated. He says, yes, but there's out of town. I said, I will get you a wonderful pianist who is capable of writing dance music out of town and have no worries. So I went to my friend Marvin Hamlish, and he came in and did a wonderful job. It still says on the poster, dance music by the two of us. And, well, if you remember, as I mentioned earlier, George Royal was the director. So many years later, George Royal directed The Sting. Marvin wrote adapted the music of Scott Joplin for it, won the Academy Award, and also won the Academy Award. I'm sorry, also did a chorus line with Michael Bennett and won the Pulitzer Prize and God knows how many things, you know. So maybe that wasn't the right decision, but I ended up going out to Hollywood anyway, and then did other things, you know.
Well, the list of credits for your TV work are just endless.
I know there was a lot of stuff. I never stopped working there, mainly because of Stanley Wilson, who was the head of music at Universal Studios. He took a great interest in me. And in those days, it was 1967, and the Universal Studios was like a gigantic repertory company then. All the directors knew the composers, and all of the producers knew each other. It was a nice atmosphere. It wasn't about money. It was about creativity and movies and trying things. And the young Steven Spielberg, 21 years old, was a part of our group, and Steven and I spent a lot of time. Steven used to come over to my house for lunch because he didn't have any money, and so I did all of Steven's first things. I did the first thing we did was Night Gallery with Joan Crawford, and then after that we did several episodes of various things, of The Name of the Game, Columbo, and then finally his first full-length feature was Duel, which we did. It was a movie made for television, which became a movie in Japan, and released not for long here. But then Jennings Lang, who was the one of the presidents of Universal, came to Stephen and said, we have this movie we'd like you to do, Jaws, and I want you to use my friend John Williams. So, anyway, that was it. So the only other thing I ever did with Stephen was a couple of episodes of Amazing Stories many years later. But we've seen each other from time to time, and we were still friendly, and but he really got used to John, and I was disappointed. But I did a load of television stuff out there, and didn't stop working. So
Were you doing a lot of
didn't see
performing
much.
yourself at that time? Playing?
No, I
Didn't play clubs? Didn't do any cabaret work?
no, I did.
Did you sing?
In New York, no, I didn't sing, but in New York, before I went to Hollywood, I played at Julius Monk's upstairs at the downstairs, and I did a lot of cabaret work there. That was the only cabaret I ever played in. But when I got to Hollywood, it was all behind the scenes, And, anyway, you got most of it.
Yeah. Billy, it's just been absolutely a treat to sit and listen to you tell your stories. A man with your experience that's had the opportunity to work with so much talent, in addition to your own talent, it's just really been a thrill to be able to record some of these stories as well. And hopefully a lot of this will be shared with a radio audience. And
well, you have enough stuff.
I'm going to write a book about you now. So, and enjoy the rest of your time here in Melbourne.
Right.
I'm glad you got. Is this your first trip to Melbourne?
Yeah, first trip to Australia.
To Australia?
Yes, yes.
Well, it's great to have you and be here. And thanks for sharing all this story.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay.